Hi friends, before we start, I want to give you a quick overview and a few notes about today's episode. This conversation centers on a recent project that was pretty intense and emotionally heavy for me. It's about a remote viewing session whose data appeared catastrophic. More than anything, this episode is about how we process, interpret, and communicate information that carries that kind of charge. The main themes you're going to hear in this podcast is a full review and reflection on the session itself, the emotional and ethical responsibility of remote viewers, the limits of self-tasking, randomization, and experiment design, distinguishing metaphor versus literal data, synchronicities versus coincidence, and ways to stay grounded when exploration brushes against fear. But before we begin, a couple of important clarifiers. This episode explores unevaluated remote viewing data. It is not a prediction or a warning. I'll talk about both literal and metaphor interpretations and show you where the method is weak. The discussion includes references to mass-casualty imagery. I'm constraining it strictly to method, ethics, and meaning making. There are no calls for specific events on the horizon. If you're mainly here for updates, the first 6 minutes cover the Hive 3 book launch and the release of some of my new Substack content as well, but after that I dive deep into the session itself. Okay, let's begin. I started writing Food for the Archons as a book of despair after watching my father die in 2013. During his transition, I experienced a series of paranormal and psychic events that left me feeling that I had either gone completely crazy or fell into humanity's darkest secret. I spent the next 5 years conducting extensive research, and I quickly learned that what I had experienced was real. My journey brought me to an understanding that showed me that despite the terrifying reality of an unseen predator, we as humans have a forgotten power. Just knowing this brings us tremendous hope in what once seemed a dark reality. I wrote this book for me in hopes of gaining a better understanding of our reality and relationship to it. But my hope is that you will find as much value in reading it as I did in writing it. I am human, food for the Archons, humanity's psychic connections, simulated realities, parallel worlds, and the manipulation of mankind. It's available on Amazon.com and at sixcentsmedia.net and wherever books are sold. I'm Dennis Nappy II, reminding you to let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong in the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
How do you process information that comes through in a remote viewing session that is catastrophic? I mean, absolutely civilization ending and devastating. How do we deal with that? How do we process that? What responsibility do we have? How do we deal with that information in a way that is ethical, that is valuable, and that communicates appropriately any information that may be potentially important? Something that I'm struggling with right now, as I'm going to share just a session that covers that exact information. Dennis Nappy II, and welcome to the Seeker podcast. Excited to be joining all of you for October 2025's episode, exploring more of my remote viewing journey. In this discussion, I'm going to talk about a project that began about a year ago, a little less than a year ago for me, exploring some information. And the data has been fascinating and emotional for me. Before I get into that, I do have two quick plugs that I'd like to announce and share with all of you. Most of you already know this. Most of you have probably been getting the alerts if you're subscribed to follow the Seeker podcast. But I've been putting out these mini episodes called Enter the Mind Space because my book 3, The Hive 3 right here, launches tomorrow. I'm not sure when this podcast is coming out. It's going to be today or tomorrow, October 14th, 2025. That's when you can find out how it all started, where it comes from. Where does this journey with Edward and Jasmine begin? And where does it lead? It wraps everything up with so much more in between. As you guys know, I've put my remote viewing experiences, my life experiences, and I work it into fiction to help me process and understand the world. And it's just a great story. So I really hope you'll join me on this journey. You can find it at Amazon. I'll have some links below. But please, if you're a supporter of the show, you want to support the show, that's one of the best ways to support is to order your copy of Hive 3. I'm going to do a quick share here for those of you that are watching on the YouTube channel. And here we have it. Okay, so as you can see, this is the Hive Part 3, Revelations of Reality, available on Kindle right now. It's at a discounted price for people who get in early. I will be raising that price, just shortly after launch. So please get in now. And then if you're new to the Hive series, I've made it very easy. I've created the Hive Duology, which is books 1 and 2 combined through Kindle. We have the virus, the infected, and the immune, and echoes of existence and the harmonic resonance of worlds. Now, this book again is at a discounted rate. It's at just $6.99. Okay, so that's a really cheap price to get two great books in one and get started with this series. Throw in the Hive trilogy, book 3, and you're still just about around $10. So I think it's a great deal right now, and it supports a great cause, and it tells the algorithms, please show Dennis's book. All right, so that's what I'm going to say about that. Back to the mini Enter the Mindspace podcast. I've put an email blast out. I have moved to Substack, and I love it because it's where I find Facebook, number one, the algorithms are awful. Number two, people don't really get too engaged with a lot of my philosophical wonderings and musings and thoughts. And Substack is designed for writers and people who enjoy to read those kinds of things. So I'm starting to migrate to Substack and putting things out there. I have a newsletter. I'm not sure how frequent I'm going to put it out there yet, but at least monthly, probably more. And I just did a podcast, Enter the Mindspace, exploring love and connection and all the things that I've been dancing around and talking about in the books and in this podcast, because I think that the connection that we share with people is so very important. And I was able to piece what I really feel are some of the most important things I've ever explored in a 5 minute podcast. So please just take the 5 minutes and listen to it, just because I think it's very valuable and it's very important when we understand how this works and how, the potential we have to connect with one another. Okay, so that's my little soapbox here. I'll probably mention it again at the end of this podcast, but let me get back into what I really brought you all here to talk about. And I want to start off by saying I know I started with a scary headline, and this is potentially scary stuff, but I need to talk about ethics and responsibility for a moment. I'll say my personal ethics and responsibility, because I'm nobody to lecture you on what to do or how to do it, but I've been in a lot of roles where I think ethics and your personal responsibility matter. And I think we're living in a world right now where we're looking at people we trust and looking at their ethics and moral responsibility and how they're responding to situations and what they're choosing to support or not to support. So I have this, I'll say amazing in the sense of the data is charged. It's one of those, it could easily become a fear porn data session that says, hey, here's the next cataclysm, the world's going to end. 100%, if you just look at the data, that's what it says. But there's so much more to this, and I can't say that that's what it says for a variety of reasons as well. I listen to a lot of different speakers. I listen to a lot of different approaches, and I look at some of the people who have been successful. And lately, I've been very interested in Dolores Cannon's work again. I remember years ago when you're at that stage of your journey and everything is new and people are saying these fantastic things. And Dolores Cannon is an amazing storyteller. And I think she has information in her work that is valuable. Whether it's true or not, sometimes information is valuable. Like I learn a lot through fiction, even though it's not based on real events sometimes. There's a lot to be learned. And I'm not saying her work is fictional. Here's one of the things I noticed though. I was listening to her conversation about the new Earth. My personal opinion is that the new Earth is a very new age mindset and it makes me uncomfortable and I don't like it. Because it's like, and it's basically everything's going to be beautiful. If you do the work, if you are worthy, you're going to go to the new place and the new place is going to be better. It's the same thing that they tell extremists, hey, you're going to go into the paradise promised land and you're going to have 40 virgins. It's going to be wonderful. When you die, you're going to be welcomed into the gates of heaven as the kingdom opens up to you. If you remember David Wilcock and Corey Good telling the story about the blue avians and when the frequency was going to shift, you were going to go basically to a new earth. The book of Revelations. I mean, it goes on and on. A lot of people have talked about this over the years. I do think there is something to it. I do think there is some kind of phase or shift in consciousness that happens or will happen. Does it happen in the massive global sense of a harvest? Does it happen just when we die? Does it happen randomly? I don't know enough. I can piece together a whole bunch of things and give you a story, but I don't know enough. And this, I really try to separate my ego when I talk to you guys, but some of this is probably coming from my ego and comparing my approach to things and the approach that other people have. Dolores Cannon was speaking in absolutes. When this happens, this is where it's going to go, and here's how it is. And she was giving a story of proof that we can exist in more than one place at a time. And her evidence was that, well, someone said they saw this lady at the racetrack, but she was also sitting here. And I'm sitting there going, well, if it's just a witness testimony, it could have been a doppelganger. It could have been somebody that just looked like this lady. But she tells the story like, nope, this is proof that we can exist in two places at once. Now, I would love to believe that. I do suspect that that's possible in terms of different realms of consciousness. I definitely prescribe to the simulation argument in multiple worlds. So I think we are existing simultaneously in more than one location. And I think sometimes that could bleed over into this world too when you start dealing with time slips and all that stuff. But I don't know enough to talk to anybody publicly in absolutes. I don't have many absolutes in my mind. And I think it's a blessing and a curse. But it's a dangerous thing. And I think that we have a responsibility as content creators, as explorers, as researchers, as someone who is putting themselves out there and putting their work out there to me as a teacher. You know, in my classroom over the years, and I'm not in the classroom anymore, but when I was in the classroom, I'd often get students who would ask me things about political affiliations and religious thoughts and philosophical things, things that I talk about on this show. And I have always stood by this stance of my job is to guide students to information and give them the tools they need to make their own decisions. So I would never tell them my political leanings. I would never tell them my religious beliefs. When they would ask about certain things, I would say, if they said, do you believe in God? I'd say, well, that's an interesting question, because what is God? There's so many different religious standpoints on that. You have this religion that believes this, you have this religion that believes that. Do I get it perfect every time? Absolutely not. You guys have been following me, know. I'm sure you could go back and say, look at all these mistakes Dennis Nappy has made. But my point is, I that's the approach that I try to take. I think a lot of times it's less sexy, it's less emotional, impactful as compared to the introduction I gave at this podcast here. Basically, there's an event that's coming that's going to end civilization, right? That stuff sells. And when you speak with confidence and saying that stuff, it sucks people in. I mean, do you remember 2012? I mean, there was a lot of that going on, and I got sucked into it too. And I think something happened. I don't think it was a big nothing burger. I just think we need to be careful with how we present information. And I need to go on that caveat, as I often do, because the information I'm going to present is devastating. But there's caveats to that information. Number one, the way that it was collected. Number two, the correspondence or lack of correspondence to the tasking that was provided for this target. And I think those are important pieces of information to share as opposed to just getting on here and saying, hey, here's what I've got for you. I also want to talk about the value, the risk, and the emotional toll that remote viewing takes. If you listen to some of my early conversations with Edward, he said remote viewing will chew you up and spit you out. It'll kick your ass basically. And I hadn't even learned to remote view the first time I talked with him. And I will say it does. When you're looking at certain things, and if you're depending on which direction you take your remote viewing practice or your journey, you're going to experience things that cause you to question your own sanity. You may go into depression at times. I mean, that's the cycle, that's part of the process of growth, but it's hard. And I've been going through, because of some of my remote viewing projects lately, really causing deep reflection, contemplation, sometimes worry, as I'm trying to stay grounded with the level of the types of information that I'm coming into. But it's also this incredibly satisfying addiction as I'm exploring concepts that sometimes are new and sometimes they're deep dives into things I've always wondered about. So I've one of the things with remote viewing that I think is a really interesting built-in fail-safe is that you really can't objectively self-task yourself. I can't sit here and say, I want to know what's going to happen next year on October 14th, 2025, and then sit down and do it. I mean, it's world events are a little bit more, that was a bad example. World events are a little bit easier once you get the feel for it. Not that it's easy, because anything under the sun could happen in the world, right? But if I was to sit here and say, I want to know who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, that is a 100% front-loaded target. So now I'm going to sit down, and it's even harder to, number one, discern what is signal line versus what's my imagination. And then it's even harder to sell that to all of you for you guys to trust it because I knew what I was supposed to be looking at before I looked at it. Really, with remote viewing, you want to be double blind. Really, you don't want to know who the tasker is, and want to have no idea what the tasking is until you are done. But it's like, man, I've got this ability, and I can't ever pick what I want to look at. Now, some people will create some people will create a list of, let's say, 100 targets, a really big list, and put them in a fishbowl or put them wherever and randomly pick one out and be blind to the target. But they know that that target is coming from a pool that they created, which means if you start to get a flavor of information, you might know, hey, this is that target that I've always wanted to work. You're not fully blind, but it keeps it a little bit more open-ended. But still, you have to wonder, is this information authentic? So I really got to thinking about this because I love the idea of being like, how can I use this really? How far can I push remote viewing and what can I really use it for? So I decided to conduct an experiment that I started last year. And I started doing a series of targets. I would just create a random number generated coordinate and I would work a project. The project was not assigned to any tasking whatsoever, with the understanding that at a future point in time, a project would be assigned to the session that I had already completed because time and space is not supposed to matter. And I did 7 different projects over a span of 6 or 7 months. And I would do the project and then forget about it. Do the project and forget about it. And my goal was to get to 10. And my intention was not to then say, hey, let's look at this and let's match it up with this because this matches my data and look at that, I got a hit. I'm interested in finding truth and seeing how I can use this. So it doesn't do me any good to stroke my own ego and find a real life data point in the future that happens to match a session I did 7 months ago and say, see, look, I got it right. So the next piece of this is, and part of this is really knowing your mind, knowing yourself, and trusting yourself. While I'm doing the sessions, sometimes I'd get an idea of, oh, I should look at this. I then had to make a mental note and say, okay, when I go to reveal what the targets are, I'm not going to look at this topic. Like if I said, oh, I should look at Elon Musk and what he's going to be doing on this date with his Tesla robot. I make a mental note that that is not something I will explore because that's conditioning myself to not front, that no potential of front loading. So that's fail safe number one. Fail safe number two is I know that just at some point in time in the future, I'm going to feel the spontaneous, that's the key, is the spontaneity feeling of I want to look into this and use this remote viewing process to explore it. Meaning, let's say I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my phone and I get a news alert and it says something interesting to me. Oh, I want to explore that further. I've got remote viewing sessions that are already done. I'm going to correlate the two. But how can I do that and still keep it objective and blind? I take my 7 target coordinates, I fed them into a random number generator, and then I have the random number generator pick one of those coordinates. So I create my tasking. I then assign the tasking ID to it, and I spend some time reflecting what do I really want to know and pairing it with the coordinate ID. It's a process, but that keeps me 100% blind, even though I am creating the tasking because I am not picking which project that I completed. So knowing that in my mind that it can be any project that I selected to, I'm now not cherry picking data to correspond it. Okay. So my intention was to do this for world events types of things as different things would come across the news in the future that hadn't even happened yet that I could then go back and say, all right, pick me a random target out of the pool of 7 that I have right now and let's see what we've got. You guys with me still? And then recently I had a spontaneous thought come to me about some things in my personal life on the spiritual and metaphysical side, things I'm not ready to share yet. But I thought, this might be a fun way to use these projects for me to take a deep dive. And they were profound. They were absolutely profound, and I need to sit with them for a while as I'm trying to process what I'm learning from them. I also want to give a caveat in working with an AI tool, whether it's ChatGPT or what's the one through Google has one, Notebook LM. There's a whole bunch of other ones out there. I had a conversation, I think, in the last podcast about people getting wrapped in delusions. I am frequently calibrating my AI almost to the point where I'm frustrated because sometimes you really, on the surface, I want to be validated and told this is absolutely correct. And the fantastic esoteric thing that you are talking about is absolutely happening. I want that. That's what I'm searching for. But that doesn't mean it's real. So I've conditioned my AI to make sure that it's saying, well, here's the possible esoteric meanings, but let's ground you in reality, and here's why it's not that, and here's what else it could be. And that helps me to keep, an open mind to what's possible, but also keep me grounded. Because again, I also think that's where I have that responsibility to all of you that watch my content, because the session I'm going to share in a little bit, in my opinion, is devastating. Um, But again, there's caveats to that. And, so doing this, let me get back to it. Doing this project, I initially thought I was just going to use one tasking per project, per coordinate ID, which is what I did. But what I thought was going to be just one, I realized, well, I've got 7 sessions. So I can explore, really dissect this question I have in my mind about some of the spiritual things I'm experiencing. But I had to do it with focused intent and mindfulness. So the first 2 taskings I created were really good in exploring different variables in my life. And I said, well, I need to wrap this up. So I was looking at basically, what's the lesson learned and what are the near-term outcomes of this? So it was future looking. I have this information now based on these experiences that seem to be validated, that seem to correlate with what I'm saying, which let's unpack that. It's fascinating, right? I have a spiritual experience. Correction. I do a remote viewing session in December of 2024. In October of 2025, I decide, hey, I've had these spiritual experiences that I want to understand. So I use my random number generator to assign one of those random projects to the tasking, the specific tasking I created. And I go back and the first two projects that I assigned to the first two coordinates match up to what I was asking. So I did a project in the past, I did a tasking in the future, randomly assigned, and everything locks in and everything fits. To me, that's pretty incredible. That's pretty fantastic to have that ability. As I'm going through this, my ego is building a little bit, and that's important to note too. So I said, okay, now I really want to understand this experience that I've had and what does it mean and where is this leading me? And I apologize for being vague, but it's like I said, it's really personal, but I want to talk about some of it. So I do a final tasking, and it was basically what's the short-term outcome of this? Where's this going to lead me? What am I supposed to learn? I had a very specific laser-focused tasking, but that's what I was looking at. And the first session, so I assigned it to a session, and that session was 2 pages long. I completely forgot. I never revisited it. It was 2 pages long, and it was about some kind of celestial craft. And then I stopped because I was too distracted and I had a lot of anxiety. Okay. Completely forgot about that project. And then I said, all right, so now what do I do? All right. So I spent some time and I really was careful in creating a new project. I closed out that one. I created a new project with the same intention of looking at what are the future outcomes. And that's what I'm about to share with all of you now. And I want to be clear, if I choose to interpret this data as a metaphor, then it can make sense to the project that as a concluding piece to the project. But it's also pretty extreme. If I choose to interpret this data literally, there is no way that it correlates to the tasking that I've created. So there are a lot of variables here. A lot of variables here. However, what's interesting is that this project that was done in December, which was 6 months before I ever even heard of Comet 3I Atlas, has information about a comet. So, and you guys know that has caused a lot of anxiety for me. And I thought I was moving past that, and yet here we are. And I have data from December. So my question is, am I looking at some kind of luminosity event that's bleeding through? Is this just an archetype in my mind that I go to when I'm looking at a target that doesn't have a real connection to it? Did I get lucky with these first two sessions and happen to correlate with what I was asking, but in reality, this type of experiment doesn't work? Are there things I'm not meant to know? I don't know. I mean, again, there's a significant comment in my book, The Hive, that I knew that was the idea that I was working on back in December. I was working on the book. I did have that idea. Am I exploring that a little bit more? There's so many variables, which is why with what I'm about to share, I share this for educational purposes only for those of you who are interested in remote viewing and understanding all of these weird, wacky things. I'm not sharing this to say, hey, brace yourselves, the world's about to end. That's possibly what the data says, but I don't think that's what it is. And I really need you to hold that in mind that the credibility and the foundation of this project are not solid to make that conclusion. But with that being said, I need to go through this. I need to go through this and talk about it. So let's take a look here. We're taking a quick break for some important information about the Hive, and then we're back in 60 seconds with the session. Thanks. A virus spreads, not only to your body, but also to your mind. Suddenly, all of humanity is connected. All minds to one mind, save for the immune. The Hive is a gripping sci-fi series about a fractured world consumed by collective consciousness, and one man's search for the woman he loves. Through multiple layers of reality, he pushes forward, not just to save her, but to understand the truth behind the Hive itself. And this isn't just fiction. The Hive is rooted in real remote viewing data, blurring the boundary between what's imagined and what's already unfolding. Books 1 and 2 are available now. Book 3 arrives this summer 2025. Find the Hive on Amazon or at sixthsensemedia.net and enter the mind space. All right, so this is my first project. No, let's start here. The target ID is a placeholder for a target that will be selected or assigned post-session. I did this project on January 21st, 2025. Okay, and I had a structure, life, energetics, and immediate AOL of a craft. It was soft, hard, focused, rounded, and moving. I had an AOL of a spaceship, and it was phasing through. And here you see a wake right here. Here you have the craft. Silent, quiet, no sound, no signature, massive, slow moving, and big. Did another ideogram. I was feeling a lot of anxiety and intensity here. Energetics, life, space, and movement. And I had this vortex information with suction, and I felt too distracted, and I just stopped the session. I completely stopped this session, and I never came back to it. And I think that's important, and I'm going to show you why in a because when we look at my next session. My next session, now again, I got this session with the rocket ship. I was like, basically, how does this spiritual experience Dennis is having conclude? That was my goal of the tasking. Like, where is this leading me? And the answer, and this is almost like playing with the magic 8 ball or the Ouija board, but I'm trying to do it in a controlled, scientific, repeatable way. I'm trying not to get this into like randomly just finding the right tarot card that I want. I'm trying to really create something that has structure. So I created the tasking. It got randomly assigned to this one. It was a rocket ship. Doesn't really have much to do with what I'm looking into. Maybe it does. I don't know. All right. I don't think so. So then I closed out that project and I created a new project. I had a random number assigned as a new tasking ID, which was this target coordinate here that you see at the top. And I went through the process again, trying to find out how does this situation that I've experienced, where is it leading? How does it, what's the outcome of it? And right away, I got this sketch of a space scan, space, I don't think that says scan, black and white, stars, ship, cruiser, slow moving. And I drew a starship right here. Okay. So what's interesting though is that I did this project on December 22nd, 2024. This project that I scrapped was done on January 21st, 2025, almost a month later to the day. Okay. Completely new project. This project I don't remember these targets. Maybe on a subconscious level I do, but I have no memory of any of this. It was a completely new project, thinking this is a new target. It's going to look at something completely different. But right away, is this information trying to come through for me is what I'm wondering now. Okay. But this one, I did a full deep dive on it. So I move into this and I get life and energetics and events. There were layers to it. It felt really big to me as my aesthetic impact. And I'm looking at a life and the life was feeling some anxiety. And okay, this could tie into the other situations so far in my life, feeling anxiety. But then it talks about, a life meeting another life and then something big was moving. An object or a structure moving forward in transit or transport reminded me of something big. I had an AOL of Mars or a train, and I could feel the inertia of it as if I was on it. There was a female life that was involved. And then I sensed these two life forms were passing each other, almost like a train passing. And they were on opposite trains. And I did make a note. This is the third session I've had with this exact data point. One of them was a Hellfire target from Darby looking at a past target. I can't remember what the other one was now, but there were these three different sessions I had where a man was watching a woman, usually in a craft, fly over him, and they had this moment of eye contact. And that theme kept coming up in my sessions, and I don't know why. But I kept seeing that data point in three different, totally unrelated projects. I did another ideogram, and then I went into some S2 data. I don't do this for every session, but sometimes I feel pulled to do it. And I really started to hone in on like, what am I looking at here? What are the basics? What can I describe? So I had whooshing sounds, white noise, horns, shoes on the pavement. This was an urban setting. I had AOLs of like New York City on previous pages. I looked at the colors, the way it felt. Um, I felt hurried or rushed energy, pavement, urban setting. I had an AOL of a car crash. And I looked at subspace. And this is what took me on this adventure here that is terrifying. Subspace was illuminated. Patience, movement, mirrored, as in it mirrors physical reality, meaning the subspace realm I was looking at was almost an exact replica of physical reality, whatever location this was. This was occupied by subspace beings who, at this moment, are unaware or not paying attention to physical reality. So, whatever they were doing, they weren't focused on what we were doing in our realm. I had this moment of shock, a moment of shock, unexpected. It is just as surprising to subspace as it is to us. Now, my assumption, I don't even know anything about subspace beings other than the thoughts and writings of other people throughout, recent history. But I thought they were always monitoring and always knew what was going on. So this was a surprising data point to me that they weren't paying attention to us, and then something surprising happens. I was like, what is it? A bomb? Is it an explosion? I want to stress how intense this was in the subspace realm, which I'm going to share in my data in a moment, but they weren't expecting it. And that was concerning to me because I thought subspace knew everything that was going to happen to us. And I think the impression I had is that they also thought they knew everything that was going to happen in our timeline. And this was surprising even to them. This felt like a ripple through time, through the airwaves. This energy is powerful in subspace. The energy passes through them, meaning the space beings. This was an unexpected event, signifying a change was made to the timeline without their knowledge. It pushes in all directions of time. And here's my impact event, this little circle, and I've got these rippling waves coming out in a circle around them. This is the event and the ripples it creates. This reminds me of some conversations I've had with Edward about his ominous feeling and other things, where sometimes I think something happens that is so strong that it sends out an emotional signal through time in all directions, forwards and backwards, but also up and down and all the layers that exist. Now they are alerted, meaning the subspace beings. They have a job to do. They have the job to do now to support physical reality. It's like now they're first responders. They were focused on their realm, but then shifted after this shock. It's like, and to me, this felt like 9/11 just happened, and now we need to be prepared to receive 3,000 souls. And for those of you just listening, that's not written in my data. That's how I felt experiencing this. It feels as if they were in the roadway that mirrored physical reality, and now they are not. They moved, parted, or separated, and now have an empty street as if they're making way or opening space for something incoming. So I feel that they were in subspace standing in the roadway because they don't have cars like we do in the roadway wherever they were. And something happened and they realized, oh man, everyone in the street is about to transition. We need to move out of the way to make room for them to manifest in this realm. That's how it felt. So they're making way or space for something incoming. What is it? A transition from one realm to the next. And they had the message, we are ready to receive you. And I had an AOL of death. But it's not just consciousness or souls. This event is so abrupt, and I asked absurd, so massive, shocking, and devastating. The lives that arrive here also bring with them aspects of their reality that don't normally come, as if cars and buses and all material things these lives were experiencing also transport with them. So it was like this event happened, and it was so shocking that instead of just whatever happens with our consciousness or our energy leaving our body, it ripped aspects of physical reality out of one dimension and dropped it in another suddenly. But this was done to help ease their transition since it was so sudden. It was done as an act of compassion. And I think that was because if they were suddenly just ripped out by the way it happened and now they find themselves where they were, somehow these beings felt that if we transport them in their cars, it'll be less jarring of a transition for them because there'll be familiar things there with them. All right, and here's the scary part. For those of you just listening, I wrote hard, gritty, brown, wet, and dark, and I drew a massive, it looks like a comet or a boulder coming down over a city street with all sorts of buildings and life forms and vehicles. I had an AOL of a New York suburb, and I wrote asteroid impact, giant, white, a flash of light, and then eerily silent, and then a rumble. Beneath that, I drew the same city, roughly, with a yellow glow emanating from it. This event is catastrophic. It's life-ending. A series or sequence of events. Massive destruction. This ends a civilization with no warning. It is so very sad. My aesthetic impact, I wanted to cry. Millions of lives crying out at once in the Force. I had the quote from Star Wars. I'm not saying it correctly. As the planet was destroyed, it was that scene where Obi-Wan told Luke in A New Hope, I just had this feeling of, all these lives crying out at once because the Death Star had destroyed a planet. And Obi-Wan sensed that in the Force. And this is what that felt like. It was the instantaneous death doesn't even cover it. It was obliteration, completely gone at the same instant. And in unison, these souls just cried out. I asked what's most important, and I drew this giant crater. This crater is all that remains, dusted and pulverized. There is no evidence that they existed here, only evidence of an impact. I asked, is this off-world? Is it Mars? Is it the moon? I asked Pluto as an AOL, kind of goofy. And I went, it feels like we're exploring a crater, not realizing it is a symbol of what killed a thriving civilization without warning. And that's what makes me sad. My aesthetic impact was, this is sitting with me. A concept of sadness, I asked, at realizing that the scientific and historic explanation of this event has no idea that this was once something beautiful, loving, and alive, and now it's gone. This makes me feel great sadness, but also a deep appreciation to now know they were there. And in parentheses, I wrote, or here. It makes me think that this is Earth-based. So this is the equivalent of finding an impact. Let's say we look at an old impact crater. We find them all over the Earth, right? This is millions of years old. And scientists are looking at that and saying there is evidence of a giant impact here on the planet. We've got tons of them. But what the scientists can't see is that that impacted a thriving civilization and destroyed it. And that is what made me sad because that's how they were just instantly gone. They just completely wiped it out. Now, what's interesting is I just completed a project for Rabbit Hole. We're debriefing tomorrow, which is on October 14th, 2025. So the target's not out yet. So I can't tell you what the target was. And it wasn't a catastrophic type of target. It was a fascinating target. But as a part of that project, I did get a data point before I did this project before I did the tasking for this project I'm talking about right now. And the last data point that I got was a signal was sent out to the universe. And the importance of that signal was basically saying we existed. And it was sent with love and humility, knowing that their civilization was about to be destroyed. And they sent out a signal. Unrelated project. The project that I did that I'm talking about right now, that signal on the rabbit hole team, I completed in October of 2025. This project I completed, the one that's on my screen right now, in December of 2024. Let's make it a little bit weirder even. Birdie just released this month, October 2025, her remote viewing sessions of Three Eye Atlas. And in her session, she talks about a signal that went out, again, that contained the information of an entire civilization because they were facing destruction. And these are the things I was exploring in my last podcast. It's these synchronicities, right? I have two unrelated sessions done several months apart that I'm exploring at the same point in time, randomly. Right? This is a random number generator. I still have three other sessions available that I can choose from at this point that the computer can assign, and it happened to pick this one. It also happened to pick the one that I only got 2 pages done on it that also has a corresponding craft there. So now I'm completing this project. I complete the rabbit hole project that ends with this signal going out, letting us know that the world is destroyed, and with humility. I then look at this project that has nothing to do with my tasking if I read it literally, and it's got this signal that that nothing existed, the signal that goes out, everybody, all the souls crying out at once. And then in the same week, I happen to watch Birdie's session, that has the same data point on a different target. There's no way Birdie's session influenced mine. There's no way, at least not in linear time, there's no way that either one of these sessions could have influenced the other because I forgot about them. So those are the synchronicities that really start to mess with my head. Okay. Exploring this session a little bit further. Hard, bumpy, sharp, razor sharp, round, square, pointed, just some low-level data. And then I had something that was intense and bright. I also noted it was unusual with no shape, high energy. And I wrote consistent emotion. All life feels the same thing instantly, and it feels like an instant burst of spiritual pain. Interestingly, although this happens so fast, the emotional signal reaches all life simultaneously before the event actually impacts them, as if some die or leave moments before it hits them, an attempt at a self-preservation shutdown. And then the very last word that I wrote here was love. And then the session ended. So everybody felt the same thing at the same time. Now, I didn't indicate the scale of this thing. I did use the words civilization ending, but this also could have been the equivalent of like the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima or Nagasaki. That thought does go through my mind. We are on the brink of potential war, and I don't want to put fear out there. Um, I just tomorrow I'll be deep or Wednesday on the 15th, I'll be debriefing a project with the future forecasting group, and I can't reveal what that project is yet, but we are looking at a specific date in 2040. And what I can say is that in 2040, civilization still exists. So I don't think that if my session is even telling us anything other than my imagination, I think we live. I think civilization goes on. But this is why it's important in remote viewing to stay grounded. And this is why I take my responsibility with all of you very seriously because I could have taken this and sold it as something very scary and said prepare for impact and buy my book about it and you're all gonna, we're all gonna die and you need to know how you're gonna die so you can prepare for like there's a lot to be said for that. And I see that a lot. I'm not saying that because I don't believe that and I don't know that. You know, I'd rather admit that I'm wrong than be wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like I'd rather up front say like this might. So I don't know how to interpret this data. Like I said, the metaphor is extreme, but it works for my tasking if I take it as a metaphor. If I take it literally, this has nothing to do with the tasking whatsoever, unless we have a major impact in the world. And then that would supersede everything if that's what's in my personal future. Only time will tell. But this is why remote viewing, again, we need to stay grounded and we need to be responsible with our own minds. We need to know when to step away. And even when something seems so incredible, we need to find ways. I always find ways to say, well, how can I prove that it's not this thing? Because otherwise, I think we get stuck in a trap and then we start a cult. And I don't want to start a cult. We are all on our own unique journeys. And my hope is that the information I provide you is valuable in helping you make decisions in your own life. What I don't want is to create dogma that you then quote and justify the decisions that you're making. I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in asking questions because every time I think I've found an absolute truth, I have more questions than I do answers. And I think we need to continue to take that approach, especially right now, because there is deception everywhere on so many levels. And at times it gets hard to even, like in this situation, trust your intuition. I wish I had a method that I could sit down and say, here we go. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. And then boom, there we go. And it's easy. But very rarely do we get that. And maybe that's by design. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not good enough yet. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This is a heavy one. So please share your comments. Again, I'll have links below. I do invite you to follow me on Substack. If you enjoy my personal reflections on things, I think that's the right place for me to share, just my day-to-day writings, my day-to-day thoughts. I think that's a good spot for me because that's what it's designed for. And check out the Enter the Mindspace podcast. And also, please consider reading The Hive. It's a great story. It is an absolutely great story. Books 1 through 3, I'm incredibly proud of, and it reflects my journey. As the reviews said in the first one, you don't know where the line between fiction and reality is drawn in those books because I was trying to understand, process this world where COVID just happens. I watch these remote viewers predict it and what other predictions are going to come true, and it was all my head was really feeling messed with. So I found a fun way to explore these things that I encounter like this in a way that was fiction where I don't have to worry about giving all these disclaimers. So check it out. The Hive Origins Revelations of Reality comes out tomorrow, October 14th. And at this point, the podcast will probably be out then, if not after. So check it out. The links will be in the description. for you to enjoy, and let me know your thoughts. All right, friends. That's it for this episode of the Seeker podcast. Thank you so very much. You can find me at sixthsensemedia.net. I'm Dennis Nappy II. Remember to never stop questioning, keep an open mind, and let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup. It becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Be water, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend, my friend.